right. Welcome back, guys. Hope you enjoyed the snacks. Up next, we have Payam, who is a senior designer that works remotely in BC. Payam's lived all over the place. He moved to the GTA when he was 9. He's worked in San Francisco. He moved to Toronto, and he currently lives in Vancouver. He's going to be talking about the future of product design. He'll look into what's holding us back and what the future could look like if we evolved more rapidly by connecting with each other. Come on up, Payam.
Thank you. Hi. Exceptional design relies on human connection and collaboration. The winners in this field are going to be the ones who can scale these interactions through vast systems and networks. Some of what I'm going to say today might sound a bit abstract. I'm not here to suggest specific tools or tactics. I just want to explore what the future could be, not predict what it will be. I remember growing up, a lot of my memories consist of building stuff with my dad. I remember this one time, my grandparents were coming to visit us for the first time, and they needed a place to sleep. So my dad and I went to every furniture store in town trying to find a bed for them. Couldn't find a single one we liked. So instead, we just went to the hardware store, bought a bunch of the raw materials, and built one ourselves. And it was perfect for their needs. And from simple, practical experiences like this, I learned that I could mold and shape my world to work the way I wanted it to. I didn't have to settle for the status quo. I wanted to be an inventor. I wanted to make stuff that solved problems for people. A little bit later on, when we got our first computer, that fascination shifted towards making stuff in computers and software. And for a long time, I was just really fascinated by making art in this magical box. I even went to design school, mostly because I just wanted to play with computers all day. Then I eventually realized that you could actually make a career out of building stuff to solve problems for people through software. It was this wonderful, magical medium where the marginal cost of innovation was so much lower than traditional physical goods. And you could also track your users' behavior and understand how they're using your product to inform improvements you want to make, and then push those changes right to them to make their experience better. So when I finished school, I went to work for one of the biggest names in tech at the time, hoping to learn a thing or two about how technology is made. This company had a track record of innovative products that had led them to being the industry leader. We were highly structured and had a process for virtually everything, with very specific teams working on very specific problems, and we'd had a lot of success that way. But then the landscape changed. New competition entered with a fresh perspective, customer expectations started to shift. And before long, we all saw that this ship was heading for an iceberg. But the ship as a whole was too rigid and set in its ways to course correct. The products we were making started to become irrelevant. And I saw firsthand, this was my first job out of school, how an industry leader could fall apart. So I did a 180. I went and joined a tiny little startup with an audacious mission. The team was passionate, idealistic, and full of ambition. The team was small enough that the entire company could gather around the lunch table every single day and discuss our ideas. We were full of talented and bright people with great ideas, but when it came time to executing them, we often stagnated over problems that had already been solved elsewhere. I'll give you an example. I remember spending an entire day trying to figure out the best forgot password workflow. Now, I knew that this was a problem that had been solved elsewhere, but I honestly didn't have a better way of describing it to my team other than designing it all from scratch. We didn't have any systems or infrastructure to rely on. So we often spent valuable time on just trying to establish the foundation, the basics of a user experience. We just didn't have time for that. We didn't have time to make every little tiny aspect of the user experience awesome while also making leaps and bounds towards our core company mission. So we often had to compromise quality for speed. Now, those of you who know my history might know which companies I'm referring to, but it doesn't really matter because a lot of us have worked somewhere along this spectrum. So having had these two experiences, it got me thinking, work on a really tough problem together, to work on a really tough problem from a holistic point of view, you need to get a lot of people from different areas of expertise working well together. The paradox is that as teams grow, communication slows, and the mixing of ideas that came very naturally in small teams becomes very challenging. On the other hand, the scrappy startup has its own set of problems, mostly around lacking process and infrastructure. So I started wondering, would it be possible to create an organization where collectively we were much more effective than the sum of the individuals in the organization? Would it be possible to have a team that is as agile as a tiny startup, but with the infrastructure and systems of an established, mature organization? So, what would design look like in an organization like this? To get a sense of where design might be going, I want to take a look at where computer science was just a couple of decades ago. The culture was surprisingly different than the culture that we see today. Engineers would say, sharing my code with other people? That's insane. I worked really hard on this. It's precious to me. Working on the same part of the code base as others? Sounds chaotic. I don't want to have to update my commits every day. No thanks. The very idea of working outside of one's own personal apparatus seemed inconceivable. But then something changed along the way. Engineers, programmers, coders, they started connecting online. They started sharing ideas, and that became a more integral part of their culture. It became a more open and inclusive environment. Before long, tools like version control enabled many different people to work on the same problem at the same time without running into each other. It enabled them to share their ideas in the form of code and have others riff off of it, remix it, rework it, and throw it back into the community. Stack Overflow allowed for a place where anyone from the entire field of computer science could go and find answers to questions that others had likely already answered. Things like style guides and asset sharing, peer reviews, knowing what others were working on, knowing what decisions were made in a project and why, knowing the entire history of a project, all became the essence of the engineering process. And this established a new kind of neural network between the minds of these individuals that allowed for their ideas to break past the traditional barriers of time and space, allowed for their ideas to cross-pollinate and flourish in ways we'd never seen in history. And this is what I refer to as the collective consciousness. Today's engineers are operating on top of insanely complex systems, but they're able to interface with it by tapping into the collective consciousness. There's a sense that you're working on something much larger than yourself, a sense that you're not alone. You can leverage frameworks that were built by people who came before you, so you can focus purely on solving a new problem, creating something that's genuinely needed, instead of wasting your time working on something that someone else has already done. And if you're stuck, you can tap into this thriving community and get answers. And that's become the whole ethos of the CS world. And as a result, they are solving some of today's toughest problems. Now, CS is just a recent example, but if you look throughout history, you see this pattern over and over again. Think about the invention of the written language, map making, the invention of currency, the printing press, the internet. Anytime humans find better ways to connect and collaborate, anytime we find a shared language, a richer shared language, we see exponential progress. So, let's look at what we're doing here. And by we, I mean the entire field of design, not just here in Shopify. Today, we're solving some of the world's toughest problems with software. Software products we're working on today are orders of magnitude more complex than they were just 5 or 10 years ago. And user expectation of what software can do has increased immensely. But we haven't quite kept pace. We haven't yet reached a state of collective consciousness. Let's think about this. We're still working in a mostly offline, siloed fashion. We're all working in slightly different ways, in our obscure little ways of designing, and that makes it really hard to have a shared language to share process. We don't yet have a serious emphasis on building reusable, modular components, so it often feels like we're starting from a blank canvas. We shy away from complexity, ignoring some of the really important details, the important dimensions that are core to the experience we're trying to create, leaving them up to chance, up to interpretation. And sometimes we can even seem like gatekeepers. Gatekeepers of these artifacts that represent our ideas. Artifacts that lack the depth and transparency to enable others to truly build off of the work that we've done. But things are getting better. More people in our field are starting to talk about their work, share their process, write about their insights. Groups here and there are starting to work on systems and conventions to get everyone on the same page. Every now and then we see sparks of progress, but to ignite a fire, we must all take part in this. Look, we're passionate about the work that we do. A lot of us take a lot of pride and ownership and take our work very personally. For a lot of us, the idea of sharing our work early and often for the sake of this greater good might seem vulnerable, might make us feel vulnerable. It might even seem pointless. It may challenge our very ideas about ownership and collaboration. But we can't wait for some application or plugin to facilitate our collaboration. It begins by shifting our culture towards embracing connectedness. So I ask you, how can we challenge our own process, our own egos, our own teams, to accelerate us towards what could be the force behind helping us reach the collective consciousness? Imagine a world where we can have many people working on the same problem without tripping on each other and stepping on each other's toes. A world where we collectively work on a system that we can put our trust in, a system that can work with us when we're not there, a system that we can rely on and not feel alone. Imagine what could be possible if you articulated your ideas in such a clear way that they could speak for themselves when you're not there to speak for them. Imagine what others could do with those ideas. And imagine what could be possible if we accepted and embraced the inherent complexity of the medium we're working within. Imagine what we could do if instead of this complexity hindering us, it could support us so we could purely focus on creation, focus on solving human problems, instead of getting caught up over technical details. We're constantly making the complex simple for our users. I think it's time we turn some of that attention inwards and looked at the way we work together. By reaching this collective consciousness, I think our roles can become far more impactful. The definition of a designer is always evolving, and I think that in a few years, many more people, a larger portion of people in an organization will identify as designers, because they'll be able to tap into the collective consciousness and solve problems that they understand better than anyone else. And if we're truly talking about the future of product design, then let's take this a step further. Imagine if the collective consciousness expands beyond just those in niche product-driven fields, just those in elite tech companies. Imagine if everyone could tap into the knowledge and foundation of our craft to solve problems. Imagine what could be possible if we all worked together. We could strike down gatekeeping and exclusivity and allow everyone to bridge the gap between what they need and what technology makes possible. That bet that I made with my dad, what we're doing is infinitely more complex than that. So the best thing we can do is to just enable everyone to tap into this great resource and work together. So we can make living on this planet better for everyone until we all meet our demise in the inevitable heat death of the universe. Thank you.